Thank you, and a very warm welcome to everyone to this session on positive cultural change in economics. And a very warm welcome also to those who are following us online. This session, as you know, is live streamed. I'm Giovanni Razzo. I'm Professor of Economics of Public Policy at the University of Reading, and I'm also the chair of the committee, the conference committee for the Royal Economic Society. You have seen, I'm sure, these two slides in other sessions you have attended remind us that the Royal Economic Society has a code of conduct, which is exactly about creating a positive and thriving environment, inclusive, where everyone can really feel included and can participate and flourish. And you also have seen this about the fact that this effort of creating a positive environment is not just an individual responsibility, but it's also a collective responsibility. As a chair, of course, I will be sure to be active and challenging individual behavior if it arises. And of course, you can do the same, in particular during our session on the question and answers, when we open the floor up to you and your reflections. So do ask questions from genuine curiosity and regardless of the presenter's background, the gender, ethnicity, language, or age. I think these two slides are actually quite pertinent for this session, of course, because they remind us that the Royal Economic Society is very active and very present on the efforts of creating a positive cultural change in the economic profession. In particular, is one of the key strategic objectives of the Royal Economic Society, that of creating an inclusive, improving equality, diversity, and integrity. And it's not just one effort, it's not just one-off, it's not just about this session. I think the words positive cultural change are also important because they underline the fact that we are on a journey on this. It's about, it's not the first time. There's been work going on at least since the last conference, since the conference last year, but also it won't be stopped here. It will be continuing, exactly because, of course, the conference is a flagship event for the Royal Economic Society. It brings together almost 600 economists from all kinds of professional, disciplinary backgrounds within the economic profession, but also from different career profiles. Not so much so in terms of diversity in the demographic, but that's exactly what we aim to improve. Another point is that I think is important to see in the title of the session, Positive Cultural Change, is that positive reflects not just the fact, the outcome we want to achieve, this positive and thriving environment, safe and inclusive environment, but it's also about the process that we are in, the journey that I referred to a moment ago. So in fact, the aim is not to point fingers to a particular group of individuals, but really to have a positive conversation with everyone, to open a constructive dialogue. And this is exactly, I think, quite important because this genuine positive approach is what I think distinguishes our three key speakers today, which you see here on the panel. I think that I will introduce them just in a moment, but what characterizes them, what I could see from the work with them over the past year, is this genuine commitment to act to improve equality, diversity, and inclusion in the profession. It's a commitment, I think, that originates not just from, not at all from personal benefit, but really from a kind of moral duty that they feel towards the profession and towards this particular topic. So let me introduce them one by one in order from your right to the left. So the first speaker is Joe Grice. Joe Grice, you have seen the first slide on the Code of Conduct. He's the chair of the Standard of Conduct Committee for the Royal Economic Society. Joe has had an extremely distinguished career in the civil service as an economist, analyst, chief analyst in various government departments, including the Treasury and the RNS. As I mentioned earlier on, he's now the chair of the Standard of Conduct Committee, and he will provide some evidence, empirical evidence, with reference to a survey that the Royal Economic Society has conducted during the past year, particularly following the conference last year. And again, it's an example of the fact that we are on a journey in this. It's not just one moment, one fixed session. After Joe, we will have the second speaker, who is Emilia Lazarova. Emilia is the head of School of Economics at the University of East Anglia, and she is the chair of the Conference of Heads of Department of Economics of the Royal Economic Society. Emilia will talk about the theory and research evidence around one of the key mechanisms for cultural change, which is that of being an active bystander. Emilia's talk will be followed by a short video, and then we will open the floor to you for any questions, reflections, answers that you may have from, and you may want to have from the panel. And then we will close with Professor Denise Osborne. She really needs no introduction. She's Emeritus Professor of Econometrics at the University of Manchester, but in particular I think she's a fantastic role model for all of us, someone who has really pushed boundaries and has broken new ground. Just to mention a few, she's been the first woman to be appointed Professor of Econometrics in the UK. She has been the first chair of the Women's Committee in the Royal Economic Society, and she's done incredible work for the Royal Economic Society as Secretary General for many years, and just to mention a few, so really no better person to close this session. So again, warm welcome to all of you, and we can start with the real content and the evidence, and over to you, Joe.
Thank you very much, Giovanni, and good afternoon to everyone. The background, as you know, is that the Society became concerned about the impact of poor behaviour in the profession in the UK. Poor behaviour is nasty in its own right. Nobody really wants to be shouted at or belittled, bullied in the course of their professional life. But it's also inimical to the objectives we have for diversity and inclusion and integrity. So it's really something we have to work hard on, and I think Mary's address as President yesterday highlighted that. The Society set up a few years ago a code of conduct, a complaints procedure that went with that, and also the Standards of Conduct Committee to administer that complaints procedure, very much targeted actually originally on behaviour at society events such as the conference and other society events as well. The idea initially was that the Standards of Conduct Committee would investigate complaints about behaviour at society events, and if found to be substantiated, would then recommend various sanctions, degrees of severity to the trustees. Now, in the event, we're nearly 2 years on since the committee was put in place, and so far we haven't had a single complaint. And so one might think at first sight, well, that's great, actually we didn't need to worry too much about this, it wasn't such a problem as we thought. But we very quickly became clear that that wasn't necessarily the right answer. So to get a bit of a better grip on what was really the situation, last summer and last autumn, the Society put out a questionnaire, a membership survey, to inquire a bit more about some of these issues. There were really three key aims of the survey. The one was to find out actually really whether people knew about these mechanisms and been put in place, the code of conduct, the complaints procedures, and for that matter, the Standards of Conduct Committee. We also inquired about how successful the measures had been which were taken at the Glasgow conference last year. Did people really feel that the way that these measures have been applied had actually made a difference, in particular displaying the code of conduct at the beginning of all sessions which was supposed to take place? And then more widely, and perhaps of most interest of all, was actually people's feeling about whether problems of standards of behaviour were a problem in the profession more widely, not just at society events, but actually in the course of people's professional lives. And the results we got in terms of awareness were a little bit mixed. Nearly half of the membership, I should say actually, by the way, the response to the survey was high by comparison with the responses that the Society normally gets to its membership surveys. So we took that as an indication in its own right that actually people did see this as an important issue and worthwhile investing the time and energy in responding to the questionnaire. About half of the respondents knew about the code of conduct, which of course also means that about half of the respondents didn't know about the code of conduct. So one of those things you just have to keep going on at until to make people aware of these things. Only about a third of the respondents knew about the complaints procedure, how the code of conduct was being enforced at society events, and barely a fifth of respondents knew about the Standards of Conduct Committee. Not in itself a great issue. I think more importantly, 60% of the respondents felt this was an area where more needed to be done. The society needed to continue with its efforts and reinforce its efforts on this issue. We also asked about how people had found the code of conduct and the enforcement carried out at the Glasgow conference. These are numbers of respondents rather than percentages, I should say. What they indicate, I think pretty uniformly, is that for the most part, people did feel the measures that applied had been useful and satisfactory and applied consistently. But actually quite a large tail of people felt in various degrees that that hadn't been the case. In some sessions, for example, the code of conduct had not been displayed. In other sessions, it had been displayed, but in a kind of yardy kind of way. This is just one of the legals, if you like. Quite a large number of people said they'd witnessed an issue at the conference, and that, again, only 18% of participants knew what they could do or how they could behave if they'd witnessed or been subject to inappropriate conduct. Now, the responses to how people saw this more widely. This is a word cloud. We decided to produce a word cloud rather than to give what was perhaps the most interesting part of this, which was the free-form comments that we got. And if I can describe the nature of the free-form comments, the majority were, okay, fine, no great problem here, but a very significant tail included some pretty hair-raising accounts of the way that people had been mistreated or believed they'd been mistreated. And it looked as if that wasn't just one or two aggrieved individuals. This was actually quite a long tail of people who felt they'd been subject to inappropriate behavior, sometimes on a regular basis. We didn't want to endanger people's confidentiality, which is why we produced this word chart. What sticks out in the word chart most of all is senior. I wouldn't myself get too hung up about that. I think we have a profession which has a clear senior, junior gradient. What I do think it means is that senior means that leadership is important here, and it's not necessarily the case that the senior members of the profession are the problem, but they certainly can be part of the solution. But I think what is more significant is the other words that come up: bullied, aggressive, inappropriate, and even on a couple of occasions actually sexual misconduct or inappropriate conduct with a sexual background. So all of that left us with a feeling that actually there was a significant issue here. We shouldn't over-dramatize it. I'm sure in most cases people behave in a very professional and sensible, sportive way, but with a considerable tale of inappropriate behavior within the profession, which we would be very ill-advised to ignore. Probably just as importantly was the responses we get to, well, if you've been subject to the response in the survey to, if you've been subject to inappropriate behavior, or if you've seen it in others, why didn't you follow it up? And the answers there, I think, were quite revealing. They were things like, well, that's just the way it is, or nothing would happen if I did complain, or if I did complain, the consequences for my career, for my progression, would be adverse. So I just didn't see I got a way forward. What we'd like to do is try to give people a way forward. And with that, I think I'll hand over, having presented, as it were, the problem, to Amelia, who I hope will at least give us some indications of some possible ways forward.
Thank you, Giovanni, and thank you, Joe. And thank you, Joe, for sharing with us what we are saying about our profession. I think the first positive step that we are talking about it. The second positive step is that the Royal Economic Society is supporting, not only talking about it, but also putting in place active measures to address it. And so what I will be talking about is the conceptual framework and the evidence we have around positive cultural change, and the one specific practical tool, that of becoming active bystander. But let's start with the big picture and acknowledging that when we act as economists, be it in a role as a professional or an academic, we act in an environment where formal and informal norms prevail. And that is our culture, that is the context in which we act, which impacts on our opportunity to be relevant to the world, as well as on our opportunity to collaborate with each other. And if this culture is not working to that effect, it means that we cannot be the good economists we can be if it does. So what can we do to drive positive cultural change? Well, there are really few steps to that. The first one is to educate ourselves. What are our objectives? What is the place that we want to reach? What are the issues that we currently occur? And then to equip ourselves with the tools to drive this positive change. Understand what works and what doesn't work. Maybe look at other disciplines and see what they've done. What is really important is to have the institutional support, so the work of the Royal Economic Society, the portfolio of events that are put together are really important. We know that there are the formal institutions that support this change. And once we, the membership of our subject, of our discipline, can subscribe to that change, also ensure that the newcomers are going to follow through. So really, 3 steps: the knowledge, the attitude, reflecting on our own selves, on our biases, on our own experiences and what they bring to this context, and then acquiring the skills to ensure that we are going to move towards this change. And this is set in a very nice way by Esther Duflo. And I thank here Sarah Smith from the University of Birmingham and Discover Economics, who shared this quote with me. The profession is starting to realize that in part of its general climate and the way we treat each other, that is not conducive for having more women in the profession. And it goes on saying that it is not just about promotion, it is also about how we speak to each other at seminars, that also discourages women and junior colleagues who do not want to shout at each other in order to prove a point, and that it is indeed our responsibility to change that, and that is also going to ensure that we can be a more relevant profession. Now, economics is not the only discipline that needs cultural change. In fact, some other subject areas have embarked on this cultural change before we have. And here are some quotes from literature from medicine, education, psychology, and biology, and you will see the states 20 years ago. So there is actually experience out there. There are disciplines that are further ahead in the learning curve from whom we can learn. And I'll give you a quote from a study. Incidents of bias and microaggressions are prevalent in the clinical setting and are disproportionately experienced by racial minorities, women, and medical students. And I believe if you replace clinical setting with departmental seminars, conferences, classroom experience, conference social events in economics, you'd feel, wow, they're speaking about us. And that is a quote from a study in medicine. And what this study promotes is a practical tool, that of becoming active bystanders. So what is active bystander? How does it work? And does it work? Oh, active bystander is exactly that. We are, in some sense, bystanders in our own environment, in our context. In the business, in the hustle of our professional life, we need to take the responsibility to observe and collect evidence, and also take the responsibility individually and collectively to act when what we observe is negative behavior and commit to changing this. So where is this happening? What is happening everywhere where we act as economists? It happens at conference venues, at seminars, at social events, in the departmental corridors. So wherever we act as economists, we have the duty to observe and act. But can we agree on what is negative behavior? I think hardly there is anyone who disagrees that what we have on the two slides of our codes of conduct is a behavior that we cannot agree with. I think we would all agree that these were very well thought through slides and that these are universal truths. And nonetheless, we probably ask ourselves, but is it just me? So let's have a thought experiment. And let's take ourselves outside of the time when we act as economists and be just a person on the street. Would you always help a person who's fallen on the street? You say, well, pretty much yes, I see some notes, but would it depend on the age of this person? On asking yourself, am I embarrassing them by helping them? On how the person is dressed, on their ethnicity, on their age, on what time of the day it is, on how many other people are around, whether you were the first passerby or there were already 5 people who passed by ahead of you. And all these questions are very normal questions to ask of ourselves. So even in the situation of, oh, there is a person who is hurt, who needs help, actually, in reality, we may not always step in. And that's my personal experience as well. So becoming active bystander is about counteracting what comes natural to us, being passive bystanders. What we need to acknowledge is that our culture is as it is because norms by definition are there not to be questioned. And so if we want to move to a positive culture, we need to start questioning these norms. And this is the first step. So if we see that there is something that we think doesn't feel right, then it is about, is this okay? And we need to acknowledge that it does take courage. And before that, we will need to weigh up the costs and benefits. And some of the responses of this survey, we did hear, well, it is so low level that is it worth it for me to take an action? But if we never take an action, this low level will persist. So it is about weighing up the costs and benefits and thinking when is low enough and when the cost is high enough. There are 4 practical tools, really. The first one is in a situation like this, where some things feel wrong, is to be direct, to speak on behalf of yourself. Nobody can question what you see. To question the behavior rather than the person, and just be calm and respectful and state, from my point of view, I see things differently. This would be wrong. Please stop. But I do understand that when you are in a vulnerable position, that may be something very difficult to do. Situations may be such that you may not feel safe to do that. So there are other options out there. There is the option to distract, perhaps to change topic, or if you are an observer from further away, to just intervene by asking for directions, to break the flow of what may seem inappropriate conversation or tone of conversation. It is possible to delegate. Usually in conferences like this one, there would be organizers who are quite visible, just approaching them and asking them for help, sharing what you have observed. That is another way of dealing with this. Delegating to your senior, a mentor, somebody who can intervene on your behalf, your head of school, your head of department, a champion in your school perhaps. Or delay. Delaying means you don't take an action now, but later on you approach the victim in the situation, the person you have observed being subjected to inappropriate behavior, and speak to them, ask them how they felt. That may empower them to speak up for themselves as well. If somebody has observed this and has felt uncomfortable the way they have, they may feel, well, it's not just me, it is right for me to speak up. And that is going to be useful to them as well. As I said to you, we are not alone. There are other subjects where cultural competencies, learning about what positive culture means, has identified to be important. And we can start learning from what these subjects have been doing. It all starts with the concept of active bystander that has been coined by the understanding that naturally we are passive bystander. The first seminal work in this area is from psychology, and I have quoted it for you there. It dates back from the 1968, and it is an experiment. And what this experiment shows is that the number of perceived bystanders impacts on the probability of reporting or becoming an active bystander in a way in which the higher the number of bystanders are, the lower the probability that somebody acts. And this is then the concept of diffusion of responsibility. So if we feel that I'm personally not responsible to take an action, then you're less likely to be taking an action. And also in this study, they show that actually those who've taken an action, they take it quite quickly, relatively quickly. And if we wait and we question ourselves, then we are less likely to act. Of course, since 1968, there's been more than 50 years of literature that's developed in this area. And don't worry, I'm not going to review for you these 60 years of literature. And also this literature, of course, has replicated this study, has questioned some of the setups, have introduced nuances around gender, race, the composition of the bystanders, the timeliness, and so on and so forth. But the evidence is there. Naturally, we would be passive. We would be passing on the responsibility to someone else. So to counteract that, we need to train ourselves to become active. And in that respect, there is also literature, and there has been training rolled out and tested in terms of its effectiveness and impactfulness. As I understand, the first training on active bystander was developed more in educational context and targeted particularly sexual harassment and sexual violence in universities and high schools. It's coming mainly from the US. I think a landmark publication in this respect is in 2014, where a report of a White House task force has collected enough qualitative and quantitative evidence to suggest that this kind of active bystander training in this context is effective in decreasing the incidence of sexual harassment and abuse in these environments. And there is more to that, more even randomized control trials, impact evaluations, and what is really important to extract from that the training is important not only in decreasing the incidence, so at the global picture, but also in terms of empowering the individuals who receive the training to speak up for themselves. It is useful in terms of raising awareness of the issue, so to say. And once that literature has convinced us that active bystanding can act to stop harmful behavior, then it was taken up further by some disciplines, in particular in medicine, and they have looked at how to roll this out into a context of broader positive cultural change. So that is in medicine and education studies as well. And they look at training on racial discrimination and biases. And what is really interesting is they talk about then evidence collected not only around people reporting of becoming more active bystanders, but also junior members of the community being more empowered to act on the issue. And in fact, the last piece of research that I quote, it is from medical education that is also supported by a Wellcome Trust grant for the authors to develop such training on active bystanding to be integrated in the curriculum of medical schools. And I know that they're also speaking to NHS trusts. So in a nutshell, the evidence is there. Some of this evidence of impact evaluation uses methodology that we economists subscribe to and believe in, such as the randomized control trial. And it does show that engaging with this training has multiple effects, short-term effects in terms of awareness, long-term effects in terms of taking this up as your own tool to address actions, but also empowering people to speak up. So as a head of School of Economics at University of East Anglia and chair of CHUT, I take it upon myself to make this part of my agenda. I shared the Royal Economic Society video of becoming an active bystander with my colleagues. I played it at the beginning of the school board meeting. Well, everybody was there waiting to hear my statements as a chair. And I'm available, and I have pushed myself to act as active bystander in a variety of settings, and I'll be more than happy to speak with any of you about my experience on that and help you understand how it works and how it can work for you. And now I'm going to play a shortened version of the video of the Royal Economic Society.
For too long, biases, harassment, and negative behaviour mean that not everyone is able to access or experience all the positive things that we have in the field of economics. And this has to change.
Here at the Royal Economic Society, we have put in place a code of conduct and a complaints procedure, which is upheld by our Standards of Conduct Committee. But we can still do more to change the culture so that everyone can grow and develop as economists.
When certain groups are underrepresented in a field, this can be due to biases or stereotypes. And this can start at the point of entry or while they are in the discipline. So this might create a negative culture.
There's also been a culture of fear around reporting because of the power imbalances and hierarchies in play. And even those who acknowledge there is a problem can sometimes find it hard to intervene or challenge the situation. Perhaps it's the ambiguity of a situation, perceived cost or risk of intervening, or what's called the bystander effect, where in large groups, everyone assumes someone else will do something, and therefore they're less likely to do it themselves. But we can make the bystander effect work in our favour. If just one person in a group intervenes, this makes it much more likely that others will step in or step up.
What I think is necessary is understanding what an active bystander is, because that both gives you the tools to deal with things, but it also does open your eyes to an awful lot of subtle bullying and harassment that can happen in academic and indeed in other situations, but I think particularly in academic situations, particularly in economics, where seminars are set up to be quite confrontational, where people have networks that they've built up over years that don't let in other people, where people have kind of views about other people that they may form collectively that are wrong. So I think it's really important in economics to kind of get on top of this.
There are several steps to this. The first and most important is you need to educate yourself. You need to understand what sort of situations might be difficult for people and for what different reasons they may be. The second thing, of course, is to notice when these things are happening, because taking notice is vital. The third thing is, of course, to interpret whether a situation is one where you might need to intervene. The fourth thing is actually to assume responsibility. It does not mean you may want to do something yourself, but it does mean you want to have a strategy about things you can do when these things happen.
Don't forget that process and systems are important too. If you see a group could be excluded, for example, from a meeting or a recruitment process, then ensure that process is reviewed and delegate responsibility to develop a more inclusive approach.
There are actions you can take to promote an inclusive and respectful culture. For instance, at conferences or meetings where participants are presenting their work and getting feedback, you can ask questions in the same respectful way, regardless of the gender, the ethnicity, the language, the perceived age or seniority, and asking those questions from a place of genuine curiosity. That is something that everyone can really do.
You need to make sure that everyone buys into the agenda. And it is everyone's responsibility to support our community.
So being an active bystander is one way that you can play your part to learn more about how to recognize when you need to intervene, what you can do, and how to do so safely. Please see the RES resource on the website.
Is it working? No. Perfect. Thank you. Now is really the time to open the floor for any reflections, questions, clarifications, points you want to make, and answers you want to receive from the panel. So we have some minutes for that, and over to you, really. Any questions?
No? Yes? Oh, wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Really, really good. Great topic. Fantastic that it's included as kind of a general session. I was just kind of wondering, when there doesn't seem to be consequences for inappropriate behavior always, especially like an institution level, when you see something, you raise it with the appropriate authorities, and nothing changes. And then there's also kind of, especially if it's a senior person, there's then reputational damage on you. It's kind of like, if you follow this procedure and nothing really changes, except kind of negative consequences for you, what's the, it's kind of like, what I'm asking is, what can we put in place to make sure there are consequences for people who do inappropriate things?
Emilia, you want to?
Yeah, well, I'm really sorry to hear that you feel that there have been no consequences, and then even you fear there have been potentially negative consequences for the person who is reporting on that. This shouldn't be the case. I'd like to believe that institutions are working towards positive cultural change. We've been walking through Queen's University Belfast, we see posters about stepping up. Sometimes I think it is not about people being bad. It is about people not realizing that their behavior is not appropriate, and therefore these people need to be educated. So the very minimum, there has to be feedback to this person, and conversation needs to be happening. And if this behavior persists, then that can be escalated. Something to say is that we're really trying to have a discussion. We're not trying to penalize people. We know that everyone's voice is valued. We just need to change behavior here. So what I would say, if you feel threatened, then maybe a way to address is by speaking to somebody who can act on your behalf and be an active bystander, somebody with more experience who wouldn't feel as vulnerable, and that could be a way of doing it. But also there is the Standards of Conduct Committee, the Royal Economic Society, and approaching them and hearing their views may be useful.
If I could just add to that, I mean, I think a lot of the behaviour that we're really trying to get at probably takes place not within society events, but actually in individual institutions and affiliations. So we need to find ways, I think, of working with employers, with organisations, to achieve a common objective. What the society has is a role to ensure the profession as a whole is healthy and improves its performance in this respect. And that should be in employers' interests as well. So I think we can all have a role in making our own organisations more responsive to these issues. Jude is a very important part of the jigsaw, in my view, because that's one of the ways we can work with other employers in the organisation. So it's not going to be done easily overnight, but I think we all have a role. And one of the things I'd underline is we all have a role in actually making our own institutions and our organisations more sensitive to these problems.
Thank you very much, really. So I think my thinking is maybe we could have like an anonymous system where students can actually, because I would guess that all the issues we have amongst ourselves in the profession, among academics and our PhD students, based on kind of my experience kind of with the pastoral role with kind of master's students and undergraduate students, I would guess the issues are even more severe amongst kind of those relationships with kind of, you know, there are some bad apples in the profession, and I know for a fact there are instances where they do take advantage of their students, and it's kind of like, well, if there's not an anonymous way to them to report them, you know, how do we identify these bad apples and we can essentially get rid of them? Because I know education is definitely important, there can be communication issues, but for also instances of actually just wrong behavior that's not acceptable, and education won't fix it, and they just need to, they shouldn't be in a position where they can just continue to take advantage of young people. It's, and kind of due to reputational concerns, universities often kind of turn a blind eye, and it's just like, this is not okay. So that's kind of, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we agree it is not okay, and that actions should be taken.
Sorry, yeah, I'm not sure what the question is, I'm sorry.
Thank you. There's a question at the back, and then one, not yet, okay.
Thank you, great talk. I'd like to raise 3 issues, perhaps, that you haven't discussed, and you may choose not to address either, any of them. But so 3 issues that stand out to me in my experience from my own department are the following. We've experienced an interesting trend in the female participation into our major. We used to be a discipline that attracted quite a few women relative to the sciences in particular, and that was true in the 50s and 60s and maybe 70s. And we just plateaued about 30 to 40% female participation in economics. Since then, we've seen basically that plateau remain, whereas other disciplines have been much more successful in attracting women to their disciplines, including some of the hard sciences that traditionally have been overpopulated by males. Issue number 2 is, in a sense, what you're addressing is, forgive me, but I would say the symbol problem, the one where you observe behavior that is reprehensible. But I think the more pervasive and harder to address problem is the issue of subconscious bias. By that I mean situations such as when you appoint members of a committee, the chair tends to be a male. When you basically assign duties to different members of the department, there's a preponderance to rely on individuals that perhaps are more energetic, and those tend to be males over females. There are certain racial biases that we all carry with us that perhaps we don't express necessarily, but subconsciously we exercise them. And so that seems to me a harder problem to address, because I see less of the overt, I'm not saying that there isn't, I'm saying I see less of the overt bad behavior, but I think most of my colleagues would say that these subconscious quote-unquote discrimination of individuals at different positions is much more pervasive. And the third issue that I would raise is awareness of the psychological damage that these individuals, whether discriminated at a conscious or unconscious bias, creates, issues of depression, and of course those have tremendous effects on performance and so on. That was very evident during COVID, as we all struggled through being confined. And I feel that, in a sense, that has exacerbated our awareness of how important these issues are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, we fully acknowledge the issues that you're mentioning here, and I would actually refer to brilliant reports by the Women's Committee, and I know that the most recent report has come out very, very recently as well, that are documenting the leaky pipeline of women, but also the almost non-existence of black academic economists in the UK, and no female black economist professor in the UK. So there is a spectacular amount of work that is being done to evidence this issue and to address this issue. And so we're not trying to avoid the topic, to reassure you. The topic is very much live, and we, the Royal Economic Society and the Women's Committee and the Diversity Champion, are doing wonderful work to collect the evidence and to bring it to the table for the agenda. Whether being an active bystander can help us address some of the other issues that you're mentioning around our biases, conscious or unconscious, or selectivity of groups, I would still be more positive in terms of thinking, yes, they can, just calling those out. So what you just did, the observation that you just made, making that observation within your department and questioning the practice in a constructive way.
Thank you. This question, here, intervention from Steffi in the front here, third row.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all the efforts that you went behind putting this session together. It has been very good, and we have learned a lot. Something that I think is very important to mention, and this is not a question, sorry, it's just a comment, it's about the role of the active bystander, that sometimes we want to change the system, we want to change the structures, but that's going to take time. So while changing the system, we have to support those going through the system in a system that is unfair. And I think that's the important role of the active bystander. It's not just about changing the structure, as supporting those ones who has to deal with the structure. And that's very important if we want them to kind of get to the top, if we want them to don't leak through the pipeline. And I think that's perhaps one of the most important roles that this work can do, is just support those ones coming.
Thank you, Steph.
Thank you. Any other question? If there's any reflection on Steffi's point or anything, just let me know. Any questions? Yes, over there, please.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Amelia on behalf of TUDE for having an active bystander event for TUDE members. And just wondering if the panel has any advice for heads of school when colleagues come forward and say something that's difficult to hear, and how they might just take that moment to actively listen and consider their response. Do you have any advice that you'd like to share more broadly? We discussed those things at the TUDE meeting, and I'd like to say thank you, Amelia, for doing that.
Yeah, thank you, Denise. Well, it isn't easy, isn't it? Because it is so personal. Even when it shouldn't be personal, it is personal. But I think what we first need to start with is to acknowledge that we, irrespective of our roles, we have our own biases and our own weak points. And just acknowledging that and allowing ourselves to learn. I think this was my first big lesson as a head of school, was to acknowledge how much I don't know. And as you said, pause and listen, and then speak in a constructive way. And really remind yourself of your objective, and your objective is to have a good working environment for yourself and for your colleagues would like to have a thriving school, as a head of school, this is what you would like to have. And in order to achieve it, you need to listen to people. And it's not about who is right and who is wrong, but where we are together. So I think it is about reminding that it is all about the public good as when you are head of school, and admit that you can be wrong. Actually, it is a great example to say sorry. Because if a head of school can say, sorry, I was wrong, then everybody else would feel okay to have made a mistake and recognize that and just move on. I mean, at the end of the day, we are all in the same boat. We are all learning.
I think if I could just add to that, I do feel that making this a genuinely collective endeavour, the society playing its part, but working with departments, with heads of departments in particular, and actually sharing experiences and learning. If we can pull that off, then I think that will be a major advance towards achieving what we want to achieve. It would be a great mistake to feel that actually this is just something that society can do on its own, or that the society can do centrally, or any of those things. We've got to find ways of making this genuinely a collective endeavour.
Thank you. I think that's over, unfortunately, on this part of the session in terms of question and answer. Thanks very much for all your questions and points. Of course, you have an opportunity later on after the session, after we complete, to reach out and ask any points you want to. So I really leave the floor now to Denise for the closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Giovanni, and I think it's been a very uplifting session to me. I've been in an active, well, not so active now, but an academic for a long time, and it's great to see the momentum that things have changed, because it really wasn't a very good atmosphere in economics in the sense of being inclusive. And I think what what we've heard today, and the fact that it's an issue and recognised as an issue, and the people here, many of the younger generation, I think, recognise it. So we often need to educate the older generation that haven't realised the biases that they've had, and the way that seminars and discussions have been conducted. So I think we've all agreed, everybody here, it's a very important topic. The society started a few years ago, not many years ago really, I guess about 4 or 5 years ago, we started to talk about a code of conduct, and I was very much involved in those discussions about the setting up of a code of conduct. The emphasis on that was negative. I think unacceptable behaviour is unacceptable, and we wanted a mechanism by which people could point to that. But I think what's come out of that, and what is much more positive, is the positive side of the code of conduct, the cultural change that and Joe's referred to. The Code of Conduct Committee is now thinking in a different way, and I think society is thinking in a little bit a different way, and it's a much more constructive, if you like, way about culture, the change of culture that everybody can subscribe to, I think, or hopefully in time everybody can subscribe to. So we want a culture in which everybody's opinion is valued, that, and there's been some reference in the discussion to students. Someone who puts down a student, that's not acceptable. And I think we need ways, perhaps within universities, it can be thought about ways in which students who aren't going to, if you like, stand up to the professor, but ways in which they can point out things that haven't been acceptable from or which they haven't been comfortable with from their point of view. So the active bystander approach, I think, is very pervasive, that we don't just sort of stand back and say, oh, that always happens in economics. That's not what this is about. This is about trying to change it in the ways, the levers we have, and different people in different contexts and different levels of seniority will have different levers that they can pull. So think about the levers, the ways you might be able to be an active bystander. I think there's a particular emphasis, obviously, on what senior staff, in a sense, can do, but sometimes the senior staff don't quite realise. So if you're thinking there's an issue often there's someone in a department, or we've talked about an academic context, and for that I apologise, but let's think about the academic context. You might feel there's a member of staff you can go and talk to if you're a junior that might be able to do something. So think about the levers you can do, because it's all about a positive framework, which is what we want in economics. And we want to ultimately address the unacceptable behaviour, or the behaviour that makes people uncomfortable. In some sense, unacceptable is perhaps a bit too strong. The behaviour that makes people feel uncomfortable, and help educate everybody. So this session, I think, has been great. In a sense, we're talking to the converted, those of you who are stayed and still here and perhaps listening in online. You're probably convinced, but hopefully there's been some things that you can take away and some that help on that. So it's been a great session, but it's not a one-off session. The Society, it's part of a program that the Society has and it feeds into one of the strategic objectives of the Society, and you can pick up the leaflet on the Society's current strategic objectives on the RES table. They're just there to pick up. There are 4 strategic goals, and they all interlink. They're not 4 distinct pots. They're 4 things that all interlink, of which improving diversity, inclusion, and integrity in the profession is one of them. But as I say, I look at this and think they're actually all part of a jigsaw. So so it is important to the Society, and we want to move on, not just talk about it. So the video we've seen, it involves a lot of people, and it was done in conjunction with the Government Economic Service, so it goes beyond academia. The full version is available on the RES website to watch. Amelia said she's shown it in a school meeting at University of East Anglia. That's great, and I'm sure it will be promoted through SHUD as well. And it's something that seeing the senior people in the profession, presidents, past presidents, etc., of the Society, and other people active in the Society, there's a lot of name recognition that others will have with the people who are talking in that video. So I think it's very good to share that video, and it's available for everybody. And there's, in fact, a whole set of diversity resources available on the Society's website. So there'll be a further survey conducted later in the year, and I think Joe referred to that. Monitor progress along the way, and hopefully reach a wider audience than we've got here. So I've talked about sharing the video. So think yourself, but as I say, I think we're talking to the converted here. The people here are the people who are likely to be interested in this topic and take action. But just, as I say, think about the levers you can pull yourself. And sometimes those can be indirect rather than direct. It might be depending on your position. It's a collective endeavour. I think those of us who've been in the profession for quite a long time have half realised. Looking back on my career, I've been in many seminars. I've given seminars where, thinking back, I remember early in my career giving a seminar at an institution which I will not name, and someone criticised me on the basis of my first slide that was simply the topic of what I was going to talk about. And looking back, that was dreadful. So that shouldn't happen. So things have come a long way that we've recognised, I think, to a large extent as a profession. There is an issue. We do welcome, the Society welcomes your suggestions. I'm sure Joe, Amelia, Giovanni, Marie-Louisa, anybody else within the Society, grab anybody from the Society if they feel there's something you'd like to say or input in this way. If you'd like to be more proactive, there's always ways in the Society of looking at ways where people can be more proactive and having a volunteer role in some sense that would contribute to this agenda. You can always email the RES office if you can't see anybody, or you think, later on, how about this? So email the RES office. Or session feedback in the conference app would obviously be great. So so it finally, I think, falls on me. Well, I'd like to thank first the audience for being here, because without an audience it wouldn't be very effective. I was struck by some of the comments, some of the questions, that there is still issues and people are thinking about. So the input from the audience, but particularly our speakers, so Giovanni as chair, Joe and Amelia, I think thank them very much for the efforts that have gone in. I know there's been a lot of, and the office, there's been a lot of background effort in putting this session together. So if you please join me in thanking, I'm just here to make some comments. I really haven't done it, so thank the others for the work.